So, good morning. Here we are, day two with Jay Allen. I'm going to tell you about him in a minute. It is Rebuilding Business, this series of interviews with outstanding entrepreneurs and experienced leaders who have reputations as trailblazers in their fields. Our intention is to share with you that experience over 5 bite-sized 10 to 15-minute interviews, one each day of the working week. We hope that in this age of post-COVID, we're going to help you to consider how can I rebuild my business or improve its sustainability, increase your creativity and innovation to beat your competition, or with a little bit of luck, I think you're going to be picking up some huge nuggets of your leadership journey as we speak to Jay. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. Jay is our 2 times global entrepreneur, big impact to business award-winning scale mentor. He's listed in the UK on the Clear Business Thinking Power 100. He served as a rapid deployment soldier with the British Army and subsequently has worked at the highest level with 2 national supermarkets, helping to generate nearly £500 million before branching out into this current role. Jay has set up 4 businesses, scaled 2 and exited 2, before founding the Add a Zero Business Challenge. Jay, hello, and it's great to have you.
Good morning, Lily. Thank you.
I'm quite excited, particularly today, because you like to say some fairly contentious things in your presentations, don't you?
Absolutely. There's no point beating around the bush.
No, I think, I think if you want just a little bit more of the same, there's no point in booking Jay. If you really want to look at your thinking, smash it up, tear it up, rip it up, throw it in the bin and start again, this is where we are. So I'm going to start with your contentious statement, which is 80% of business owners are wrong about everything. What does that mean?
Well, it just got me to wonder a while ago, probably 10 years ago now, as to why it was that so many business owners seems to be at networking events putting on this rose-coloured spectacles of everything's fine and I'm rosy and I've got a little bit of capacity, whereas in actual fact you know full well that behind the doors they're working every hour God sends, fearful that there's too much month left at the end of the money and that things aren't going quite as well as the plan that they first had when they set up in business. And it just made me realise that there's a lot to be said for this face of business that isn't actually telling the real truth. And one of the biggest problems with that is the fact that we seem to be a little bit lost. No one at school told us how to be able to set up, grow, scale and exit a successful business. They pretty much told us how to be able to take out a bank account and a checkbook. And when it comes to setting up and running or growing a business, we often almost rely on monopoly when we were a kid or that type of understanding of business. No one taught us how to be able to do it well. We seem to be winging it. And as a result, we tend to look around our competitors or our local environment and say, oh, I noticed that they've got a website. Perhaps we ought to have a new website. They've gone into podcasting. We're going to have to do a podcast. We seem to be following each other around this pit, hoping that one of is the magic elixir that leads to scale. And the simple fact is that the majority of people are following each other around this dead end, as opposed to understanding that in order to be able to grow, one, we have to look at our international competitors. We have to look at businesses that are already scaled. You know, the Jeff Bezos of this world that this weekend was announced as having been the first man in history to have netted a net worth of $200 billion. We need to look into Jeff Bezos to find out as to, well, what's he doing and how can I learn a little bit of a lesson from that and take, 0.001% of his industries to become my own. Stop looking at the local competition and start looking back at who's already doing it to find out as to how they are different.
I think that's definitely one of my challenges to a lot of my clients is actually, never mind what are we doing that's really good, how do we make exceptional as standard? How do we take it to that kind of level is absolutely crucial for me. And like you say, there is a lot of facade, isn't it? You go to conferences, we both speak at conferences and events, and you see people doing oh yes, we're doing really well. It's a lot of sort of gentrification over the reality of what's happening behind. Just a short story. I was at a conference that I was speaking at in November last year, and before I got up to speak, so I was the last speaker, and there were about 450 people at the conference. 5 people came and pressed their card into my hand, and they didn't even tell me what their name was. They just said, just in case I don't get time later. Obviously, thinking of as a conference delegate, and that's absolutely fine. But it's just going, what am I supposed to do with that if that's your form of marketing, or how you're going to present your business to me is just to go, I'm not interested in who you are, what you're here for. Here's my business card. It did make me laugh.
And it's ironic because the majority of people who do that will measure the success of their marketing on how many business cards they passed out, as opposed to how many valuable conversations or relationships they started to build.
And that's the foundation, though, isn't it? And I'm really interested for you. You say 80% of business owners are wrong about everything. Can you just take that a little bit larger? What, the clothes they wear, the approaches they make. Just tell me a little bit more detail underneath the surface of that, because I know that it is a challenge, and we are sometimes following mediocre, or people are following mediocre rather than the best. What else are they doing wrong if they're wrong about everything?
Well, first of all, let's quantify where the statement comes from, because yes, it's quite controversial, but to the same extent, it's not just something a statistic that's been made up. It's from studying more than 300,000 small business owners across the UK and being able to categorise them into one of 5 segments. In any sector, in any industry, right now, 1% are nailing it. They're absolutely smashing all the records. They are industry leaders. They're the ones that we're all looking to and thinking, oh, if only I'm old enough to recall that in my business lifetime, in my actual lifetime, in my business lifetime, there are 2 guys called Steve that set up a little workshop in one of their parents' garage to be able to build a computer, who went on in my lifetime to become the richest electronics store in the world. So there are 1% of businesses that are doing exceptionally well and breaking all the records. There's a further 4% that are doing really, really well and well on the way to trying to join that 1% exclusivity club, but probably haven't quite got the automation or the systems or the processes to be able to continually support that. There's still some manual work that needs to be done. And as a result of that, there's some cogs or clogs in the cogs that aren't allowing it to be able to grow as quickly or as effectively as it possibly could. And there's 15% of businesses that are doing more traditional style growth patterns of grow and then average and peter out a little bit and then grow a little bit more. I often call it shortwave radio growth, because you get peaks and troughs throughout either the season or the year or how things go on. But 60% of business owners admit that they're struggling and it's not quite the way that they anticipated running and growing a business. 60% of small business owners admit that sometimes there's too much month left at the end of the money. And you've only got to go to Companies House and realise that 20% of businesses that are registered are closed and fail every year. So unless you want to be in that average bracket of 60 or the 20% that fail, 80% are clearly getting something wrong because it's not working the way that they first anticipated. And that's where we get the facts from.
Okay, now I'm with you. Now this is the critical thing, because if we think about the Steve and Steve, that top 1%, this isn't the stuff that actually you learn at a business school, or is it?
No, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I'm fortunate to do is I've been invited several times now to be a guest lecturer for the MBA programme for entrepreneurship at several universities, including where I first started off doing that at UCLan in Preston. And I always find it quite fascinating that I'm invited to come back and deliver a day paid for by the university, where my opening gambit is always, okay, so you've got as far as here and you're in your 2nd or 3rd year on your MBA programme, and now I want you to completely forget everything that you've been taught, because it's the theory that's going to allow you to create so many hurdles that you're going to struggle to overcome in real business. I'm here to be able to unpick some of that and tell you what's important and what's not.
So they pay you to come and tell their students that actually everything they've learned isn't necessarily going to be helpful?
I think the university quantify it by saying it's an alternative viewpoint from somebody that's in the field.
Okay.
But the simple fact is that, I would challenge anyone who's learning about entrepreneurship to establish it's almost the Jim Rohn quote. You have to accept that you become the sum of the 5 people that you're surrounded and influenced by the most. Well, if you're being influenced by lecturers and trainers and teachers of people that have never actually run and grown and scaled and successfully exited a business, then the chances are they're only relying on the theory of how that's possible.
It becomes academic, doesn't it? It becomes very academic. So can this entrepreneurial spirit, do you think, can it be taught, or is it just that creative nugget, that 5% genius that we hope is in most of us, if not every one of us?
Well, to answer that question, I need to go back and just quantify entrepreneurship, because I have a real concern that over the last 3, 4, probably 5 years as a max, that the phrase entrepreneur has almost become a fashion statement that people almost aspire to, regardless of what that actually means. Whereas in actual fact, it's very much okay. It's more than acceptable to be a phenomenally successful business owner without even contemplating what entrepreneurship actually is or ought to be. And there's room at the very top for both very successful business owners and highly successful entrepreneurs. So I don't want people to feel that unless you've become an entrepreneur, that there isn't any hope or future for the future. The next things to be able to offer is, we ran a survey on LinkedIn in a group that I'm in, that I'm partly an administrator for, that's got about 68, nearly 70,000 small business owners from across the UK, predominantly from across the UK. And we posed a poll question in June 2020 that simply said, do you consider yourself to be a business owner or an entrepreneur? And interestingly enough, only 43% of those that replied wanted to be considered or consider themselves to be an entrepreneur. And more than 50% were saying, in actual fact, I'm very comfortable to refer to myself as a business owner. I'm now in my 4th iteration of business, and certainly for the first 2 businesses, even though I grew and scaled them quite successfully, certainly exiting the second one 7 times larger than when I first purchased it. I'd still
that was a lot of pies. That was a lot of pies.
So, yes. But I still considered myself then and now that in that phase of business, I was still very much a business owner. Yeah. And it's probably my 3rd iteration before I started to merge into this or dab my toe into this field of entrepreneurship that said, do you know what? I don't need to be physically doing it to be able to understand how it needs to be done.
So is the differentiator, is that differentiator between business person and entrepreneur, is it about the creativity, the originality, the innovation, or is it the scalability?
For me, it's a combination of both. One, it's being able to find out where the missing link is that takes it from a normal, standard, traditional, competitive business and turns it into something that has the capacity to scale, and then not falling into the trap of making the whole bigger business surround you, that you've become a linchpin to it, and therefore the moment you leave, the whole thing then collapses.
Brilliant. I think that's a really good challenge to people that are watching today. And I'm going to leave on that note of really to consider, are you an entrepreneur or are you a business person? Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the 3 flaws of business. And that is not height of flaws, but FLAWS. Jay, brilliant to see you as always. And I look forward to seeing you in the morning. Take care.
Thank you, Lily.